Hello, everyone. I am the Comics Kramer 2099, and I'm joined today by Connor Costanza. Connor, how are you today?
I'm great.
Um, we are, if you recall, like 100 years ago, we did a podcast talking about Spider-Man: No Way Home. And Connor, normally our shtick is we talk about things with Twin Peaks alumni. We talked about every episode of Twin Peaks, the old series, then the new series. We talked about the movie. And so then we started talking about movies and TV shows with actors and directors and DPs from Twin Peaks. And so Connor chose originally it was going to be one episode of Seinfeld called the Cheever Letters, and then let's see, a few days ago, earlier this week, Connor was like, "Oh wait," and the reason was because Grace Zabriskie and Warren Frost play some characters in that episode, and then Connor was like, "Hold on, they're actually in 5 episodes scattered throughout the whole series of Seinfeld." And I don't remember if I said we're talking about Seinfeld. We're talking about Seinfeld, and so then we are talking about 5 episodes. And those episodes are they're not like back-to-back episodes. It's throughout, and so it's the Cheever Letters, the Rye, the Foundation, the Wizard, and the finale. So Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit about Seinfeld?
Okay, I should probably just right off the top give a special thanks to my brother, who has been just sort of as a pastime after he gets off work, he'll just watch through a bunch of sitcoms. He's sort of been watching through the American sitcom canon. He watched through Cheers, all of Frasier, all of The Good Place, all of Parks and Rec, all of like just going through all of it. And right now he's been going through Seinfeld. And I did not know about any of this until he was making his way through season 4. He watched the Cheever Letters, which was one of his favorite episodes up until that point, and said that it featured two Twin Peaks actors. And so he told me that before I'd even watched the episode, because he wanted to actually show me that episode. But before he showed me that episode, and after he had told me about it, that's when we recorded our podcast on Spider Meme. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, oh well, cool. I guess so. Then like Spencer just told me they were in this episode, so let's talk about it. And it's been so long since you and I have recorded that podcast that earlier, like a week or two ago, he was like, oh, they were in another episode. I was like, wait a minute. Okay, well, I don't know what that episode is. He didn't tell me what the name or the episode detail of it was. So I just did some digging, and then I found out there were 5. So that's how I kind of got wind of this. But the first episode we were talking about is the 8th episode of the 4th season of Seinfeld, although on Netflix it's listed as the 7th episode. It is the Cheever Letters. And in this episode, Jerry and George, I guess I should probably lay out the dynamic. So Jerry Seinfeld is a comedian, and he's got his friend George Costanza. He's got this other friend named Cosmo Kramer, and he's got this other friend named Elaine Benes. They all know each other. They all live in New York. It's a sitcom, and they're all like, I guess the joke of this is that they're all kind of bad people, and they all kind of get themselves into like these socially awkward situations where they don't behave altruistically. That's more or less the setup of the show, and people say it's a show about nothing, although that's not really true. So in this episode, the Cheever Letters, uh, George and Jerry are in the process of trying to write an episode, or they're trying to write a pilot. They're trying to come up with a pilot, which a little meta, as Jerry Seinfeld basically just plays himself in this show, and now this character is coming up with a sitcom about himself. But George Costanza is dating this woman named Susan, and I guess in a previous episode or between episodes, Kramer or George had been given Cuban cigars by Susan's father, and he went to Susan's father's cabin with Susan as a getaway. I assume their family is very wealthy. They have like a lot of estates. It's a very nice cabin. And Kramer had some cigars, and then the whole cabin went up in flames. Also, Kramer in this episode is trying to get more cigars so that he can play golf at a golf club. And then Elaine has a secretary who that Jerry gets involved with, and that's the premise of this episode. Um, Comics Kid, how did you feel about this episode of Seinfeld? And what is your experience with Seinfeld in general?
I'm glad you asked because I don't think I had seen an entire episode before getting ready for this podcast. Many years ago, when I was like 18, I was just getting into Smallville. But instead of starting at the beginning, I started like halfway through season 6, which was what was airing on TV at the time, and I would usually about 5 minutes before the episode of Smallville would start, I would uh, turn on the TV just in case, maybe it's going to air like a minute or two early and I'm kind of paranoid. I don't want to miss anything. So I would always end up catching the last few minutes of several episodes of Seinfeld before watching Smallville on. I guess this was pre CW, so I guess this was when it was still the WB, and I feel like I'm 100-year-old man. And so I never saw a complete episode, and then like I would go on YouTube and I would watch clips. So like there was stuff that I was aware of. Like I remembered, the people with the ugly baby that they wanted Jerry and friends to. I don't know how much you know, so I hope I'm not spoiling anything. But like there, different stuff. I remember clips and like side plots that I know out of context from the whole series or from an episode. But like there's one of these episodes we'll be talking about where there's a thing that I knew about, and I was like, oh, this is from that episode. Okay. But this episode I thought was really funny. I should also point out, before we recorded a few days ago, you said you thought this was going to be the anti-Sex and the City podcast because a while back you and I watched 4 episodes of Sex and the City and I hated it. And it was also about 4 awful people who live in New York and do awful things. The difference is this show is actually funny. And that is crucial when you're watching a sitcom. And I mean, like we'll get when we get into talking about the finale. I'll talk a little bit about like the philosophy of the show, but like I liked watching this. I thought it was funny. Usually whenever we watch like a TV show, I will ask you, do you think this has made you want to keep watching the show? I don't know if I would necessarily just go back from the beginning and watch all of Seinfeld, but I enjoyed what we watched here. I thought it was pretty fun. It's going to be hard for me to remember like because I watched these episodes a few days ago, and so it'll be kind of tricky for me to separate like the plot, the like subplots from certain episodes. But I like this one. So we had George meeting his fiance's parents, and that's where we get Warren Frost and Grace Zabriskie. I thought they were great. Like I didn't know that either of them had comedic timing. Like I am kind of a hypocrite. Like if I encounter an actor when they are doing a comedic role, in my mind I have like caged them into that. I'm like, you can never leave your comedic whatever. Like when I see Steve Carell doing something serious, I'm like, what are you doing, Michael Scott? You're supposed to be like yucking it up over here in the office. And so like I had no idea that these two who I first encountered doing very serious stuff on Twin Peaks, I had no idea that they had the potential to be funny. And like I think they are solid in every episode that we're going to be talking about here. And then let's see, we had what was Kramer? Oh yeah, Kramer with the cigars. I feel like maybe Michael Richardson is a good actor, maybe, but I feel like Kramer is kind of the weak link in all of these episodes I watched. Like Kramer doesn't feel like a human being. He just kind of feels like some kind of force of nature who's like, hey, today I'm feeding beef to a cow because, or to a horse because I bought too much of the canned beef. And it just, he doesn't feel like a real human who has like real things that he's going through like George, Elaine, and Jerry do. And so he like maybe like in like when I was in college, I had a professor who one of my classmates said he reminded him of Kramer. And so I thinking about that professor a little bit every time Kramer was doing something, but yeah, I guess if I had like any complaints, Kramer is I feel like kind of the weak point in a lot of these episodes. But I also this is a sitcom, so I feel like you shouldn't like think too hard on it. But was this the one where Elaine's boss goes to like South America?
No, that was the next one, I think.
Okay.
This is the one where she has a secretary and there's some talk with.
Okay, yeah.
With Jerry.
So, Jerry Seinfeld in real life, he married like a 16-year-old, didn't he? Or was dating? Like, wasn't that a thing? Because
I think it was.
okay, so that whole
He was
like
also a bee and got involved with a human, so
oh
he's a weird sex purpose.
yeah. Um, but yeah, so the dirty talk in this one, when that happened, I was like, oh, and like I was glad that at least George was like, oh, okay, like that's what you went with in the dirty talk. So I was like, yes, thank you, George. But yeah, that also, have you ever watched Community?
I have not. No.
Okay, there's an
That's
episode.
another episode. That's another show that my brother has watched in his epic quest to watch every American sitcom ever.
Okay. Yeah, when you were mentioning the stuff he was watching, I was like, yep, I watched some of that. I watched most of that. That was about a year ago or a year and a half ago. I can't remember if it was Frasier or Cheers, but one of them was on Netflix and I was watching and I told my dad, I said, I'm watching Frasier and or Cheers. And my dad said, why? And I was like, I thought that was like the best thing that he's ever said was just throwing shade at whatever show it was. But anyway, yeah, so I don't know if I have anything critical necessarily to say about each individual episode. I guess I will go ahead and spoil the big plot twist in the Cheever letters. So there is a real life author named John Cheever. And close to the end of the episode, George and Susan are visiting her family, and then somebody comes and brings a burnt up metal box, which was the only thing that survived the cabin fire. And it turns out John Cheever had an affair with Susan's father. And then that's like the big twist at the end of the episode. And like, so we're seeing, I think Susan's brother and Susan's mom are reacting to this. And also Susan's sister is like intent, like has like maybe 3 seconds of screen time, but she says, haha, I knew it. And like, I was laughing a lot. Like, I'm not that it's funny if somebody comes out, but just you know what I'm saying? Like, just the family's like reactions. Like, there's an entire series. I don't remember what it's called, but it's these two like retirement aged ladies who they find out that their husbands are actually gay, and then that's like the premise of the series. I think maybe it's on Amazon, maybe. And so like, there's a lot to be milked out of this premise. And so I was like, oh, this could be funny. And then like it ends, and that's the end of the episode. And I was a little disappointed that they ignored that in later appearances of Susan's parents, where they act like that wasn't a thing. So I was interested there when it was like, oh, okay, this plot twist. And then like the next time we see them, that's gone, you know?
Yeah, I would agree. Also, Warren Frost's character he just has a goatee in every other appearance. That was it's one of those things where I'm curious to know how like Gen Z and future generations are going to respond to television going back, because a lot of television is like the first season's not very good. They have to find their footing, and it's not this fully formed idea right out of the box. It takes its time, and then eventually it gets there. Like I know for a lot of people, like apparently Star Trek: The Next Generation isn't like a really really good show until like season 3 or something. And that's like what's going to be interesting, because like right now I feel like what television is it's like people have this really good idea right out of the gate, and then it's good for like a season, and then they're like, crap, we don't have anything else. Like, and I think that kind of maybe goes back to something like Heroes or Prison Break or Lost or something, where like that's sort of when people were trying to conceptualize TV a little differently, where they had the idea right out of the gate, as opposed to, well, we got something, let's see if we can find it, and not get canceled before we get there.
Right.
Seinfeld is definitely of that generation of show. And I think we even see that, even though, these supporting characters have 5 appearances throughout the show, like they don't really find their gimmick until like their second appearance. You know what I mean? And so the first time around, it's like, okay, they're kind of these dysfunctional old rich people. One's an alcoholic, the other is just kind of a curmudgeon. And you find out that he had a passionate affair with John Cheever. The end. Okay, cool. And then kind of going on, like the Grace Zabrisky's alcoholism sort of sticks around for one more episode, and then it goes away. Like it's, I don't know, it's interesting.
And on top of that, because so the next appearance, Susan is still, spoilers for anyone who is interested in watching Seinfeld, Susan is still alive in the next episode we'll talk about, the Rye. And then in the third appearance of her parents, Susan is no longer alive, and they are like very like they are still latching on to George. And I don't want to jump around too much, but in that one, George is trying to like I want to get back to being a bachelor and just living my life however I want. And his almost in-laws are like still kind of hanging on to him, like even though he's like, I never technically married their daughter. Like, I don't want to be attached with them. And then, like, in that one, you get the feeling that they kind of like George. Like, we might as well consider him. He's like a son to us. He almost married our daughter. And then in the fourth appearance that they are in, they don't like George, and they're like, oh great, like they see or they call George to tell him like, hey, the foundation that you are supposed to be on the board of is having an event this weekend, and he's like, well, I'm busy, and they're okay, fine. And like that whole plot of that episode, The Wizard, is that they do not like George, and I'm thinking like, but the last time we saw them, they liked him just fine. And so like it's one of these things where like there is a surprising amount of continuity between episodes that we see, like even in these five that we watched, but then also that when it suits them, they will ignore continuity if they think they can make a better episode by doing so. And so like they're like just watching these five, at times I was like, oh, this is a little inconsistent. And then later it's like, okay, now we're kind of back to something they were doing earlier.
Yes. And it should also probably, when you say like when it suits them, they just change something up to make the episode better. Mm-hmm. That is important to know because these are recurring characters, right? Like if you're gonna arrange like your show around like a hierarchy of like character importance, obviously they're gonna come in like a third class. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as the episode, The Cheever Letters, I think this is just like a pretty solid episode of a half-hour episode of comedy television. Everyone has a little something to do. It is more George and Jerry centric, and Elaine is more tied to Jerry's side of things, but she's more in the background, and same with Kramer. Now, as far as the whole dynamic goes, I think I like Kramer more than you do. I think like in terms like if we're gonna do like the whole Always Sunny style like cast, like he's the Charlie, he's the wild card, if you will.
Nobody likes a wild card in their group.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just say, I know that you are a huge fan of It's Always Sunny. I've never seen a full episode, but I am aware it's similar to Seinfeld. I have seen clips, and so I think I saw a blooper where Dennis says nobody wants a wild card in our group, and then Charlie says, I don't think he gets us, man, or something like that. But yeah, I was also surprised that you've never watched like a whole lot of Seinfeld before this, or?
Oh, I guess I should say like my parents, what see this is okay. This is gonna like touch to like a broader topic of like there used to be a much more like because streaming and like the internet weren't as big, and I don't know, like culture was just so much more like easy to relate to other people. Maybe there's a better way of saying that. It's like everyone watched Seinfeld. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I'll put it this way, like when I was a kid, every kid watched SpongeBob. Last night at work, me and one of my coworkers were singing the Gary Come Home song. You know what I mean? That's only in like one episode of SpongeBob. But if you go and talk to any person my age now, and we're talking about shows currently, no conversation starts with, oh my God, like your dancing's horrible. It's like watching Elaine dance. Conversations don't start like that. They start like, oh my gosh, wait, pause, hold on. Do you watch Stranger Things? No, I don't. Oh, okay. Well, something crazy happened on Stranger Things. Oh, okay. And like that's the end of the conversation. Like, you know what I mean? Like culture is so spread out. There's just so much things to watch that nothing really unites everybody. Not everybody's watching the same thing, and like obviously there's pros and cons to that. So like my experience with Seinfeld is tied to like Seinfeld was a popular show in the later 90s, early 2000s, kind of going into the 2000s. My parents were like in their later 20s, early 30s when the show was on. They were still somewhat hip. Of course they watched Seinfeld. You know what I mean? And so like I remember watching a few episodes. I remember the Frogger episode. I remember like the one episode where like apparently Elaine and Jerry got it on, but they were like high or drunk or something, so like it didn't count. Apparently there was like like so I remember specific or like there's one where like George is trying to do the move in bed, and he keeps messing it up, and so they keep going back to the diner and talking about it, and Jerry's like, no, you got to do it in this order. So then he like writes notes. George writes notes on his hands, and then like when he's in bed, like his girl that he's with sees that he has like notes on his hand that he's like trying to copy off. And so I remember those episodes, but I never like like you. I'm more aware of it like culturally and colloquially. Like I know the things that people talk about, but I've never experienced it firsthand, a lot of it anyways.
Okay, because I knew you were a big fan of It's Always Sunny, and I know that show is also kind of the spiritual successor to Seinfeld in that it's also about horrible people doing horrible things. And like I know Curb Your Enthusiasm, I don't even know if it's still going. I've never seen an episode of
Yes,
it
it
either.
is. It is. I
Okay,
think season 16 or something is going to be airing soon.
okay, and so that show is about a fictionalized version of Larry David, who was the co-creator of Seinfeld, and you would think it would be the spiritual successor, and maybe it is, but like I think that It's Always Sunny probably more so. And so I knew since you were a fan of that, I was just assuming that you would be a bigger fan of Seinfeld. No judgment, but I
Well, yeah, no, and I get that. It's just that like I'm aware that Seinfeld is like the probably the cultural reference point for something like It's Always Sunny, where
mhm.
like, oh, it's like Seinfeld but ellipsis. Yeah, so I'm glad I finally got around to watching these episodes. Like I'm aware of like these character archetypes and like the delivery style and whatnot. I will say, like watching these episodes, I did sort of have a thing that I had when I was watching early episodes of It's Always Sunny, which
Mhm.
is, man, there's a lot of, in the case of It's Always Sunny, like, man, there's a lot of yelling.
Oh yeah.
I gotta, maybe this show isn't for me. I think once they get like past season 2, they kind of, you know, figure it out a little better. In the case of this show, like there's a lot of whining,
Mhm.
and while it's certainly funny, like I watched actually more episodes than the ones that we watched that we were watching for this specific one for this show, anyways, that we're doing now. And so I was like, okay, this is like 8 episodes in like one evening. I'm getting a little burnt out, and obviously this is meant to be watched in half an hour increments once a week, so whatnot. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little burnt out by the end of my viewing experience.
Yes, and that's another thing is that like you were talking about like the cultural differences of like today and like because this show started in like 92, I think. And like I mean, I was just like basically an infant and like, so like and back then you had like one show is on each channel at one time. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
however many channels there are, like there was less content back then than there is now. Now you've got like 24 different streaming services, and each service has to have like, at least 5 or 6 different original programs to entice you to come over. Because like if I want to go and watch Amazon, if I want to pay for Amazon Prime, you're gonna have to give me a reason. And it's like, okay, you have this, and this,
Well,
but all
the reason is free shipping, but the
well,
fee reason
yeah.
is you might also watch the tick.
And but like on top of original programming, you can also like I'm sure a lot of people before they consider original programming, they're going to consider like oh, I really like Star Trek, and so at one time now it's all on Paramount Plus, but just a year ago most of Star Trek was on Netflix, and so I'm sure there were people who said I'm going to pay for Netflix so I can watch Star Trek and various. And then it's like, oh, and also Stranger Things. That's a plus. But I feel like there is more stuff that's just out there now than there was in the mid 90s. And so that's also a thing where it's like shows have to try harder now. So that's why, like, in my opinion, Stranger Things season 1, awesome. Every season after that, like, no. And like, I really liked Umbrella Academy season 1, and then Umbrella Academy season 2 just felt like the same thing. And so, like, I didn't keep watching. And so, like, I I feel like that's why you were talking about shows start off stronger nowadays than they did back then, because back then, if they said, okay, you have a commitment for a season, now that didn't necessarily mean that you were guaranteed to stay on that whole season. Like I remember when I was watching, it was one of the like season 3 of Heroes, maybe. There was this show that Tim Roth was on, and I can't remember what the premise was, but it was
Live
like,
in A, right?
Yeah, that was probably it. And I think it lasted like 3 or 4 episodes, like not very long. And so like then it's like, oh, that's where like the season replacement, the mid-season replacement comes in. Because sometimes a show, we're sorry, you're just not cutting the mustard, so we're gonna give it a shot to someone else. And so, but I feel like even then, like while things were competitive back then, it wasn't as competitive as it is now. Like nowadays, you could knock it out of the park, and then still, like HBO Max is like erasing shows that were like all things considered probably doing pretty well. And so I don't really have
Yeah.
a destination that I'm going with
No,
on this.
I get, and I guess we're now going to be touching on like the wider, topic of television. But and I don't mean to go on like a big rant, so please stop me after a couple of minutes.
Okay, okay.
It is like this whole, like nowadays it is all about just content, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird to me that so many people are like all these streaming services are like, I'm gonna pay $100 million just to have Friends for a year. And okay, the rights for Seinfeld, we got to make sure we're having the rights for Seinfeld. We got to make sure we have the rights for that. And it's all these shows that our parents are watching. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody's coming up with like the new version of that. They're not thinking like, oh, hey, these sitcoms that were like, really well liked, like The Office and stuff, like we're not gonna make a new one of that. We're just gonna house that.
Mm-hmm.
And so and like the new extra, because like you're right. A lot of the appeal of Netflix, and that's sort of like the first streamer. A lot of the appeal of that was simply, oh, it has all these shows and stuff that I always meant to get around to watching. And
Yeah.
going to the video store to rent shows was very inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
Renting movies, great. Renting shows, it's like, okay, I'm going to rent this show, but I can only rent it one disc at a time out of a set. And like, there's 3 hours. And then it's like I watched 3 episodes. Okay, now I have to run back to the store, drop it off, rent the next 4 discs, and like it was very inefficient. So the convenience of watching these shows whenever you wanted to, you didn't have to wait for syndicated reruns and all that. I think that was the secret weapon of the rise of streaming. That's how I watched Arrested Development and a lot of like Breaking Bad. That's how I watched a lot of those shows. But yeah, in the case of like the way we do things now, it's like everyone is just cranking out terrible TV shows now. Like all of the Disney Plus shows suck. They're terrible. Like every Netflix show has like one good season and then they drop off in quality.
Mm.
And it's just like, I watched the first season of Invincible on Amazon Prime. It was really, really, really good. But they also had no idea they would be getting a second season. And they just got renewed for seasons 2 and 3. And they've been taking their time. So hopefully that stays good.
Mm-hmm.
But just sort of, I have that inherent doubt. Anyways, we haven't really talked about Seinfeld in a minute, but
yeah, I realized as you asked me what do I think of the Cheater letters, and I realized I was like I don't know. Like I guess I really liked Jerry is he doesn't want to talk to Elaine's secretary, and then Elaine tells her, hey, try not to chew Jerry's ear off whenever you talk to her or when you answer the phone. And then she gets upset, the secretary. And so then Jerry has to call her and say, no, I didn't say anything to Elaine. I said it's a real treat to talk to you, to Elaine. And she thought I was being sarcastic. And so then the secretary asks out Jerry. He doesn't really want to do it. And then that leads to fooling around. And then Jerry says some weird dirty talk. He says, because she says something about her panties, and he says, oh, the panties that your mom laid out for you. And like I said, it's weird because I'm pretty sure Jerry Seinfeld, like in his 40s, was dating like a 16-year-old. And so then the rest of the episode, at least for Jerry, is I don't want Elaine to find out that I said that. And it seems like all is good. He's in the clear. And then Elaine like drops the bomb of like, oh, by the way, yeah, she did tell me. And that's where the episode ends. I did think that was kind of funny. Elaine didn't have a whole lot to do in that one. And then Kramer also didn't have a whole lot. And I should point out, like, just from watching these episodes, like, it's not that I dislike Kramer. I just wish that we could have had more of him doing normal stuff. Like, him being the wild card, I think I would be fine with. But, like, I wish that he, like, I don't know what his job is. I don't, like, I know he's friends with Newman, but, like, I wish we had more of, like, if he's a taxi driver or something, like, him just going through normal problems, and then he can also, like, bust in on Jerry's apartment, and then, I'm here to steal 600 pounds of mayonnaise or something like that. But I wish we just had a little bit more of him as a real guy, I guess. And watching these episodes, I didn't feel like we got that in any of them.
Okay. Yeah, I guess just kind of going off the bat, if I had to like look at this dynamic, my first impressions watching this episode, my favorite is George Costanza. I really think Jason Alexander's delivery is very funny. I like that part where they're trying to write the running gag with Jerry and George in this episode. They're trying to write the pilot, and they're just not making any progress outside of just very superficial, like, I enter, whoa, hey, yeah, what do I say? And then they just think about it, something comes up, they get distracted. So I was. And then like the joke that I thought was the delivery I thought was very funny is where one says, "Hey," and then I say, "How you doing?" And then George Costanza says, "How you doing?" Beautiful. The way he says that was very funny.
I was wondering, and I guess you may not know, because I remember when I would see trailers for the show, George would say in the trailers, "It's about nothing," and I always thought, just watching that little soundbite out of context, I thought that maybe someone would say, "Come on, George, what's this about?" And he would say, "It's about nothing, like, leave me alone." But that was from the episode where they're trying to figure out what kind of show to pitch to the network. And George comes up with the idea of, what if we pitch a show about nothing? And I was wondering if that was before or after this episode, because the whole time when Jerry and George were trying to figure out what to write, I just wanted to say, write what's going on in this episode. Like, George accidentally burns down his girlfriend's parents' place. Like, just write that. And I was wondering when they were going to get to, like, the part where they are writing fictionalized versions of themselves. If they had already come on that idea, or if they hadn't yet.
I don't know. So this is the 8th or 7th episode of the season. I imagine that probably comes later. I was talking to my brother, and he says that there are some overarching story elements throughout a season, and I think for season 4 that it was that. So I think the pitch maybe came later.
Okay, gotcha. Did you want us to move on to the next episode?
Yeah, this is like one of the things I was thinking about while watching is there's not a whole lot to maybe talk about episode to episode. Like, I don't know, because it's like you could just watch it, you know what I mean? And there's not a whole lot beyond just explaining the jokes, and we don't want to do that.
Right. Well, I did want to say, so Connor, you probably didn't know that there was actually, by my count, 4 Twin Peaks connections in these episodes that we watched. And in this next episode, The Rye, we had the actress who played Mrs. Tremont. So the premise of this one is George. I actually think in general this episode was funnier than the Cheever Letters. Like, I think the Cheever Letters was fine, but it had I think it was just like 2 or 3 minutes there where I was like, oh, this is really funny, and the rest of it I was just like, no, it's fine. But with this one, I think it had a funnier premise. So George brings his parents to meet Susan's parents, and George's parents brought a marble rye loaf of bread, and then Susan's parents forgot to serve it at the meal. So then George's parents get the bread and they bring it back with them. Connor, have you ever done this at a social event?
Forgotten to put something out?
Or no, bring it if you brought something and brought it back home with you.
No, actually.
Oh. I do it every time. If I bring like a couple bags of Doritos, and if a bag is open, I will leave it there. If the bag did not get open, or if I bring like a 2-liter of soda, and if it never got touched, I will bring it back with me. So come at me, everybody. If I am the villain of this episode, because then George is like, I don't want my in-laws to think that my parents are those kind of people, like the Comics Kid 2099 is. And so he says, here's what we're going to do. I am going to buy another marble rye loaf, and I'm going to sneak it into their apartment. And it just so happens that Susan's parents, it's their anniversary, and Kramer has taken on the job as a hansom cab driver, like, a carriage, a horse and carriage. And I will say this episode, I think, is also very strong because it does a pretty good job of tying in some of the subplots. Like, in the first half of the episode, when Kramer, like, there's a grocery store that had a sale on a whole bunch of food, so he buys, like, an insane amount of canned beef, and then he says, I don't know what to do with all this beef. And at first you're thinking, what in the world does this have to do with anything? And then it all ties in. Mostly it all ties in at the end. Elaine's plot doesn't really tie in with the other subplots, but like what's going on with George and Jerry and Kramer all kind of coalesces into one subplot at the end. And I thought that was really good. But Jerry, do you want to explain any of this or do you want me to? Sorry, I should have asked first.
No, you were kind of in the middle of explaining it, so go ahead.
Okay. So George says, okay, Jerry is going to go and buy the loaf, and then Kramer is going to take my in-laws or future in-laws on a carriage ride around the city, and then I will stay here, and Jerry will come, and then we will just bring the loaf in, and everything will be good. But then Kramer was giving like this, 5-pound can of beef to the horse. And so then that gave the horse like really bad gas. And so then Warren Frost and Grace Zabriskie, they're like, no, we can't do this. Take us back. And then Jerry, meanwhile, Mrs. Tremont from Twin Peaks, she buys the last marble loaf. Now, I don't know if you noticed, Connor, but on the wall behind the cashier, there was like an entire wall of what, to my untrained eye, looked like marble loaves. And so she said that was the last one. And I was thinking, what's that over there? Like, and maybe it was like, oh no, that's not actually a marble loaf. That's like something that just looks identical. But they said that was the last one. So then Jerry is trying to buy the loaf from Mrs. Tremont, and finally he just grabs the loaf and steals it from her. Now, that was later. There was another episode that was not one of these 5 where that subplot comes back, where Mrs. Tremont is on
Really?
Yeah, there was some committee that Jerry's dad was on. And Jerry was running for something, and Jerry's dad was running for something, which is similar to the Wizard episode that we'll get to later. But and then Mrs. Tremont remembers Jerry, and then like everything falls apart. And so I remembered seeing that in a later episode, and then when I saw it here, I was like, oh, okay. So that's like I guess a pretty well-known moment from the show because that means it's referenced in 3 episodes at least. But and so then George goes inside with his in-laws, and then he uses a fishing pole to bring up the rye, and then Susan and her parents see it. And then and Elaine's boss leaves the country, and then she's in charge of the fashion catalog. So what did you think of this episode?
This is probably my favorite episode of the bunch that we watched. I think that it's able to build a momentum, and it has a very manic kind of wacky energy, and like just like there's an absurdism that's going on, but it's all kind of controlled and it doesn't really go off the rails. It's able to, I don't know, like it controls itself very well, I think. I would say like that was one thing I guess I could have mentioned about the Cheever letters. I like the sort of light surrealism that this show has. There's like I don't know, like in the next few episodes we'll talk. There's a lot of yelling, and that kind of got exhausting to me, honestly. However, in like this one episode that like I was hanging out with my brother and he turned on, there's this recurring gag where like Elaine's boss will just like pull out a Snickers bar and then eats it with like silverware.
Yeah.
And it's just like this bizarre thing that like is not called too much attention to. And then like later, like she's like talking to people, and then like they keep looking around and more people they're noticing are eating candy bars with silverware. And it's really funny, I think anyways, because it's just so weird. And in the case of like the last episode, the Cheever letters, there's this thing where like in the first scene with Warren Frost and Grace Zabriskie, you have you have Warren Frost looking at, or sorry, my bad. You have Grace Zabriskie look at George and say, Warren Frost, George looks kind of like your sister. And then he says, passing resemblance. And then it's just kind of like a weird line. You're like, okay, whatever. And then at the very end, when they walk into when George and Jerry walk into Susan's parents' apartment, uh, Susan's aunt is in the wheelchair there, and the second they walk in, she looks at George and says, "He looks nothing like me." And then it's funny because like I'd kind of forgotten about that, but the way she's sitting and like she does actually kind of look like him, and like it's probably something I wouldn't have noticed if it wasn't called out. And
Mhm.
so like, but I don't know, there's like something lightly surreal about that. Um, and I don't know if that really continues into this episode much, but I do think it does a really good job of just kind of keeping track of all of the little subplots. Like, I guess maybe the light surrealism comes into play with like Kramer's subplot of I went to the store and there was a bunch of good deals, so I got all of this food that I don't have room for. And the way that kind of keeps coming back is, I think, pretty funny.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, Elaine's boss. No, that's not this subplot. No, it's the hot and heavy subplot.
Oh, that's in this episode?
That's in this episode because
Oh, yes.
Kramer
Okay.
Kramer is trying to get someone to help him carry all the food up. Jerry's like, I'm not going to do that. And so then there's this guy he knows who is in a band with Elaine's current boyfriend.
That's right. Yes.
And so that ties into that. And I thought that subplot was very funny.
Yeah.
And the payoff for it is also very funny as well over the closing credits. So I think it did a really good job of like kind of bringing it all together. Everyone had a little more to do. And when I say everyone, I guess I mean Kramer and Elaine. It feels like they have more to do. Their subplots feel a little bit more fleshed out. And it doesn't feel like they're choking what's going on with Jerry and George. Although this is a much more George-centric subplot, I do like, or like just episode, I should say, the basic MacGuffin of the rye bread is just weird enough, and like the setup is funny enough. And I also did catch Francis Bay when we were watching it, and Francis Bay showed up. I actually paused the episode and had to look it up because I'm like, "There's no way," and it was awesome, and she's funny.
And before I forget, Ian Abercrombie, who was in I think one episode of Twin Peaks, I think he was selling medical insurance to Bobby and Shelley, maybe. He played Alfred in Birds of Prey, the TV series, and he is in the finale. He is in that long montage of people testifying against the group, and I was like, oh,
okay.
so that's another Twin Peaks, which I was sure you probably didn't know about that in advance. But yeah, I love that we have these little Twin Peaks connections here that weren't expected.
But also, we have guest work from Jerry Stiller and Estelle Harris, who play George's parents, and I think they're very, very funny. Particularly Estelle Harris, the loud, overbearing Jewish mother, is a television sitcom not stereotype, but archetype that I have seen my entire life, most egregiously in The Big Bang Theory, where I want to shoot my head off every time Howard or whatever his name's mom starts talking, and it's just a blatant ripoff of this. Maybe, I don't know, but Estelle Harris is very funny. So,
yes, most of the time I will actually say I found her to be just really irritating in like clips that I watched, but I was laughing myself silly in the finale. There's one thing she does close to the end in the finale that I thought was really funny. We'll talk about that when we get to the finale. But I always love Jerry Stiller in the show. Like I've watched clips where he's arguing with people, and he's also I've never watched King of Queens with Kevin.
Kevin James.
Yes, Kevin James. I've never watched a full episode of that show, but I've seen clips from it where Jerry Stiller's pretty funny. So yeah. I will say, have you ever watched Friends, Connor?
Yeah, I watched episodes here and there when I was a little boy.
Okay, that's a show I've watched the whole series through, and it's one of those, like, if someone says I love Friends, it's like, huh, you're so basic, you love Friends, but like I don't know, like sometimes I just want something that's like I've seen 2 episodes of Breaking Bad, so I'm making my way through Breaking Bad, but like that's a show when I watch it, I'm on the edge of my seat and I look down and like I'm white knuckling my armrests on my chair, and I'm just like, okay, the bathtub, okay, we're done with that. Now this is credits, and like so like with Friends, I just like having something where I don't feel like I'm about to give birth to my in organs in my body, like, you know what I'm saying, like with Friends, I feel like they did a better job most of the time, subplots would like intertangle with the like in this like you have 6 main characters and friends, and like for example, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but like most of the time you would have, okay, these 2 characters are going to be doing this thing, and then these 2 characters are going to be doing this thing, and then these 2 over here will do this thing, and it kind of those 3 subplots might not necessarily all intersect, but there would be some intersection. And I feel like with this show, like it a whole lot of like, especially Elaine, it seems like her subplots don't really weave in with the others as much. And I find her funny, but I'm also kind of wishing that they could have found a way to make her be part of the adventure a little more in these episodes.
I can understand that. I think that, well, in the case of like Kramer and Elaine both seem to be a little more on the outskirts, where like they orbit Jerry and George a little bit, but like because they're friends, but they kind of have their own thing going on, and that eventually comes to affect them. And I think a lot of it might just come down to the show was created by Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David. George Costanza is based on Larry David, and so it's like, you know what I mean. Like they're like best buddies, and these are just people that they know, and I don't whatever.
That's a good point. I didn't really. Yeah. So the ride, though, I do think, like, I like how, like, Kramer he's still, like, the, chaotic force of nature, but he is involved with what's going on with Jerry and George at the end. And I thought the hot and heavy subplot was very funny. Elaine is dating a guy in a band, and Jerry tells the guy that Kramer knows, who's also in that band, that his friend Elaine is involved with the saxophone player, and he said, yeah, they're hot and heavy together. And then Elaine is like, why'd you say that? Now I don't want him to think that I think we're hot and heavy. And so, yeah, that, and then him playing the saxophone very, very horribly at the end after they made love is hilarious. And then Elaine's reaction to that. I with you, I'm also trying my best not to just recite jokes, but it's hard to do that on a sitcom. Did you have anything else to say about The Rye?
Not particularly. But
okay.
I guess I should say something before we get into the very next episode,
okay,
which is The Foundation. This is the first episode of the 8th season.
Okay.
And it's basically a continuation of the events of the season 7 finale, which I did watch. But like right before watching these episodes, Spencer was like, "Oh, if you're gonna watch the season 8 premiere, you should probably watch the season 7 finale." So I didn't relate that to you. So that's a failure on my part. My bad.
That's fine. I knew a little bit about the death of Susan. I had like read up on it and and then this episode basically it catches you up on Susan's dead, and then they mention the poison envelopes and stuff that apparently. Go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly like fill in like kind of what what was going on in that episode. For the listening audience, basically George, I guess like the one thing they don't really explain is that George did not want to get married to Susan, and that whole episode is him looking for a reason to break things off. Like he's like, I'm gonna start smoking, but it then makes him sick, and then he's like, sign a prenup with me, Susan, and she's like, okay, I mean, I have much more money than you, so give me the prenup. So the whole episode he's just like looking for a reason to like get out of getting married to her, except for just telling her that he doesn't want to get married to her because like the scene, as he says, is just like too much to bear. And then she just dies because he wanted to buy the cheapest like invitations possible for the wedding. And apparently the adhesive in cheap envelopes is poison. And they were expecting over 200 people. So that's kind of the scenario. And then also Jerry meets a woman who is exactly like him, and they get engaged, and then he realizes that he doesn't like her because he hates himself, so he kind of hates it. But the joke is they get together at the end of or throughout the last episode of season 7, and then the kind of what happened to them is sort of given to you at the beginning of season 8. So that's more or less what you missed in the last episode.
Was the Jerry's fiance, was she played by Janine? Who's in one of the Kevin Smith movies. She was in one of my favorite chick flicks, The Matchmaker, which is a movie that I don't think anyone on the planet has seen other than me and my parents. But she's the main lead in that. It's also got Dennis Leary in it, and not Carol Danvers. The guy who owns the airport in the Green Lantern movie, that guy, he's in it. But anyway, so had you heard, like, apparently, because I feel like a year or two ago, the death of Susan in Seinfeld was kind of like trending, and what's his name, who plays George, was saying the reason that they killed off her character was that she wasn't funny. And I remember reading up on that a little bit. I don't know why, because I wasn't really reading or watching Seinfeld, but watching these episodes, I felt like that was a weird complaint to have, because most of the, you'll have characters like the guy who played the Tick, who dated Elaine, he's kind of funny. Like some of the, like, as you called them, like the third tier characters, they have like funny little quirks, but they also don't get in the way of the main characters. But I feel like also there is something to be said about a straight man. And when you have George, who's really quirky, and also all the other main characters, you don't want the side character to overshadow them. And like, I'm sure playing the straight man in a comedic setting is going to be difficult, but I feel like that is an important part of comedic stories, is having somebody who's there to kind of react to what's going on in a normal way and kind of be the anchor for the audience. And so I haven't like done any research on that lately, but I seem to recall Jason Alexander saying like that was the reason they killed her off, was that her character wasn't very funny, which I do find to be kind of odd.
Yeah, I've not seen enough of this character. She does just sort of seem to be this woman who shows up and she has big eyes and she will look disappointed or like irritated or something. And yeah, I don't know. I've not really watched much of this show outside of these episodes, so
okay.
I can't comment.
So I did want to mention that in these 5 episodes that I watched, and I say 5, but the finale is actually like an hour long, so it's almost like 6 for me. But there is a whole lot of like superhero adjacent stuff in these episodes. In the Foundation, we have the guy who played Senator Kelly in the first 2 X-Men movies. He is there.
That's who that was. Okay,
yeah.
I was looking at him and wondered where I'd seen him before.
Mm-hmm. And in this episode, the Grace Zabriskie so they go to Susan's gravestone, and then this one I think is also pretty funny. It also kind of I feel like this may be the best one at tying all of the subplots together, maybe. So they go to Susan's gravestone, and George really doesn't have anything to say. He doesn't mourn Susan. And then like one of my favorite bits is later when they're talking about Wrath of Khan, and George is more broken up about Spock dying in Wrath of Khan than he is his fiance dying, which is, classic, like horrible people in a, funny situation. But so Jerry quotes Wrath of Khan. He says, "As long as we keep her alive in our memories, she's never really dead," which is a paraphrasing of a quote from Wrath of Khan. And so then her parents put together a foundation that they want George to be a part of, that is going to do something. And so George, even though he didn't marry Susan, he is still stuck in their lives, and he's not as free as he thought he was. Meanwhile, Kramer is taking karate, I think is how he pronounced it, or karate, and Elaine takes over the business that Mr. Peterson was in charge of. And I am curious, if I know Peterson comes back in the trial, did he come back I wonder, in between the Foundation and the finale?
I have no idea.
Okay. And this was a weird one where Peterson says, Elaine, he's talking to her on the phone. He says, "Why don't you just be in charge of the company?" And then like later she tells her coworkers, "Yep, I'm in charge now." And I was thinking, that's not how it works, is it? Like there would be like a board that would direct, like they would say, "Okay, here's our new CEO" or something. But hey, it's a sitcom, and we've got like 3 other subplots that we're doing, so we don't have time to be realistic. But and then so Jerry finds out Kramer in his karate class, it's actually a children's karate class, and then Kramer gave Elaine the confidence boost to go for it and be in charge of the company. And then later when Elaine is making fun of Jerry, then he says, well, why don't you go check up on Kramer? And then she finds out that Kramer, that basically he has given her confidence under false pretenses, I guess. And then one of the funniest things in all 5 of these episodes for me was that Kramer, because when he was talking to Elaine, he said something about Irkatra, and then he says, yeah, I got it from Search for Spock. And he said, I know, Jerry will tell you that Wrath of Khan is where it's at. And I was, because I've seen Search for Spock, but when Kramer was saying that, I just wasn't putting it together that that was where it was from. And so that was, I think, one of the more subtle ways of connecting Kramer's subplot to Jerry's. I thought that was great. And so Kramer inadvertently ruins Elaine's life with a Star Trek quote, and Jerry inadvertently ruins George's life with a Star Trek quote. I thought that was really funny. But getting back to what I was saying earlier, so we have Senator Kelly. We have Terry Hatcher is in the finale, and she was in another episode earlier in the series, I assume, and she was later Lois Lane on Lois and Clark. We had Elaine's boyfriend played the Tick in the 1990s. He's also well known as the voice of Kronk from Emperor's New Groove and various other things. I'm sure everyone will say he's well known for something else. But then we had the lawyer in the finale. I did not recognize him, but the lawyer is Phil Morris, who he was the Martian Manhunter in Smallville, and he was also, his dad in the 70s was in the original Mission Impossible series. And then Phil Morris was also the voice of King Faraday, I think, in the Justice League New Frontier cartoon that we talked about. But he has like a mustache and glasses here, and I did not recognize him because in Smallville, he's clean shaven and doesn't wear glasses, and he's also like, he's not over the top, but he is very silly in this episode. And I'm not used to Phil Morris doing comedy. I'm used to him doing more serious. So did not recognize him at all. But and then the judge in the finale, I should probably save all this for later, but since I'm here, he was in the first Spider-Man movie. He was the general who did not like Norman Osborn.
Oh.
And I was watching him and I was thinking, that's not the judge from Ghostbusters 2, but who is he? Because I know he looks familiar. And I was looking him up and I was like, I don't recognize any of these things that Google says he was in. So then I finally just had to go down Internet Movie Database and I get close to the 2000s. I'm like, oh, okay. So anyway, I have talked for a long time. What did you think of The Foundation, Connor?
I thought it was okay. I think the last episode of season 7 is very good up until the reveal that Susan dies, because it's just like, I don't know, like there's no, like I don't understand what the tone is supposed to be. Like I understand like what the irony is, and like on paper it all works out, but then the way they execute it is just kind of awkward, and it's like everyone's just kind of quiet and they don't know if they should be happy or sad, and so it's just kind of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then that tone just kind of continues into this, or it's like, is it, I mean, it's awkward, but like it didn't feel like they had like a specific vision for how they wanted to do it. They just did it and then just kind of expected it would fall into place. I don't know. So generally speaking, a lot of the Warren Frost, Grace Zabriskie, like Susan's dead, we got to do something, like that whole, like George's whole subplot, I just quite frankly didn't care for.
Okay.
Because I just was bored. Because I didn't find it funny, and it was just kind of awkward. And and then also, like, beyond that, it did sort of feel like we had like this potential thing we were doing at the end of season 7. We just decided not to do it, and then we just kind of run into the awkward thing of like trying to shake off what we had at the end of the last season and trying to set up stuff for this season. And so it's just like, that's kind of what I feel like is at the center of this episode. And then whatever funny subplots are happening outside of that feels so disposable to me as a result. And I understand, like, it's a sitcom, every episode is a little disposable, but I did not have what you had, where everything felt kind of like it all came together to me. It almost felt like everything was so spread out and kind of what's the word I'm looking, irrelevant to one another. So I also just didn't find the gag with Kramer fighting kids funny at all. It was like, oh, they're kids. Like I've seen that joke in 100 bad comedies. I will say though, props to the casting department. That one kid with like the mop top and glasses is so homely looking. they
Mhm.
really did their job in finding the perfect kid for that. So
I think that kid was in one of the later seasons of Scrubs. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was towards the very end of Scrubs, not the last season, but like the second to last season. There was a whole bunch of interns that came in, and they focused on those interns quite a bit more than they did interns from previous seasons. And I am pretty sure that that kid you're talking about was in Scrubs for several episodes. I don't have his name. I'm looking at a picture of him right now, but yeah, I maybe Todd Bosley. Yeah, I think that's him. But yeah, I will go ahead and say I agree with you as far as like Susan's death isn't funny. I guess I was laughing more at like just the fact that George seems to be like, I kind of thought it was funny that he's mourning Spock who died like, 15 years before
no,
this
that is
episode.
funny. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I like
but
that.
yeah, and it's always tricky when you're gonna do like a serious thing in a comedy show because people want to laugh. If they've got awful stuff going on in their life, they may not want to deal with awful stuff in their comfort show. And so I can definitely see that, and like especially if you were like invested in a show, and like we only watched 5 or 6 episodes a piece, and you were probably, I don't know how invested you were in Susan, but like if you start to see her as a real character and then suddenly it's like, okay, she's gone, get over it, people, then it's like, oh, that's a weird, like it is weird, it leaves kind of a weird taste in your mouth. And I'm trying to think of like, I was just speaking about Scrubs. Like Scrubs, I feel like did a really good job of being a comedy show, but also it was able to pretty seriously hit the dramatic moments when it needed to. And it didn't do it a lot. It was predominantly a comedy show, but like the 2% of the show that was dramatic, it worked, I feel like. And this show, I think maybe they were just scared to like, because I feel like, and maybe this is a good time for me to talk about the philosophy of the show, where I don't have a problem with having main characters who are not perfect angels who have never done anything wrong. I think you can do a show where your main characters are a little gray. Now, we were just, I mentioned I've seen 2 episodes of Breaking Bad. I know what happens in Breaking Bad, and I feel like a show that it sets up the reason why Walter goes to make meth with his former student. And it's like, okay, I don't condone making meth in real life, but I understand why Walter is doing it. And so up to a point, they probably start saying like, okay, Walter is no longer, like, you're no longer supposed to sympathize with him. Now he just likes making meth. But I feel like that's a good example of Walter's not necessarily a good guy, but I still sympathize with him. And with Seinfeld, I feel like Larry David wanted to go out of his way. He didn't want his characters to grow and change. And that's a big thing for me. Even in a sitcom, I want to see character growth. And like if you have an awful character who does something horrible, are they going to try to make amends and change their life and become better people? Or are they going to, walk in and be even worse for whatever reason? But I want to see some kind of change in one direction or another. And I feel like Larry David, his philosophy was screw that. These characters do not ever change. They are stagnant all the time. And I think at the end of season 1, they had hinted that Elaine and Jerry were going to get together, and then they got renewed. And they do the same thing that this episode does, where they're like, just kidding, Jerry and Elaine don't get together. And that, to me, is like a big reason why I don't think I would want to watch the show. Whereas you have like Friends, where Chandler is a very different person at the end of the series than he is at the beginning. And even though the show is still funny, it's able to have characters grow and change over time in a way that I appreciated. And so I feel like this show, like maybe it was external reasons, or maybe they just didn't want George. They didn't want the status quo of George to change, and so they're like, okay, we can't. We don't, let's just kill her off. And it maybe it does fumble the ball a little bit there.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it's fine to not have these characters grow, if that's the concept myself. If the idea is like you just tune in to get what you paid for effectively, then like, yeah, I get that. Like that is kind of what It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is. There are those attempts to try to get deeper and grow. But then like it all just kind of inevitably reverts back. And I think probably what'll end up happening though is you risk, if you're just going to have like the characters, they do their thing, and that's the show. You do run the risk of kind of burning out though, and that's what I think kind of I see throughout these episodes that we watch. Um, I don't know if I would say they get flanderized. I personally have not watched this show all the way through to probably be the proper authority.
Hmm.
But at least like in the case of this, in the next two episodes, I'll probably get into it more and more. But with the foundation, um, like I do like there are moments that make me laugh. I'm probably coming across as like generally negative, but that I think that just kind of comes into contrast. Like this is a few years, I want to say, after. Well, maybe not. I don't know. It's been a second. How long after the last episode, like the Rye, was this episode?
The Rye was in January of '96, and this is September of '96.
Wow. Okay. I don't know. I feel like the Rye is so well oiled.
Hmm.
And then with this one though, like it's, I don't know, like it does sort of feel like it's grasping at straws. And I think like it is like, I like some of my least favorite episodes of It's Always Sunny are the ones where it's like, all right, last episode we really, you know, okay. I find the best way to describe this. Um, the ending of season 12 of It's Always Sunny has like this like actual character thing for one of the characters. And then
Hmm.
season 13 has to like bend over backwards to just like revert everything back. And that's like one of my least favorite episodes. Um, this is kind of like that. Um, where it's like, Seinfeld was dating this girl and they actually got engaged and then they broke it off. Okay, there we go. It's
Hmm.
like we can't really have Seinfeld get too involved in anything in this episode because we already devoted like 10% of his screen time in this episode to, undoing what he did last episode.
Hmm.
And also Jerry Seinfeld is not a good actor. So if anything dramatic is going to happen, then it needs to happen to a different character. And so it's like, then it sort of feels like it's the George show, and I just find like the problem I have with the death of Susan is more a problem of tone than anything else. Um, but there's so funny things throughout it. But then I don't know if you had anything else to say about the episode of The Foundation.
Probably not. What was Kramer doing in this one? Oh, the karate.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. Like, I guess it's not like that and again, this is where like, Kramer is in a car with a bunch of little kids and they're all begging the mom of one of the kids to take them and get ice cream. And he's like, please, please. And so like, again, like I feel like what I liked about the subplot was the Star Trek connection that is kind of a parallel between Jerry, George, and then Kramer and Elaine. Um, and maybe that's me being too generous saying that it connects
No.
everything. But I feel like Kramer is just like, what do we do with Kramer? Let's have him do something completely bonkers that no sane human being would actually do. And like, I'm trying to think of a good example of like the weird crazy one that I like from a show. Like, I don't know, like, in Parks and Recreation, like Rob Lowe's character, he is like a health nut who's like overly positive, and it's like but I have met health nuts. Like I like to have imbibe in a Diet Mountain Dew every day. As my personal beverage of choice. I don't do alcohol. I don't smoke. I don't date girls who chew. I like to think I'm okay, but then when I drink my caffeine beverages, and then I know a guy who's like, oh, don't you, he wags his finger at me. Don't you do that? Are you still drinking the Diet Mountain Dews? And so like I know people who are like that. I don't know anyone who's like Kramer, and so like that's where like I keep sounding like a broken record, but it just feels like they were like, let's have him do something completely weird, and it crosses the line of like this isn't realistic. Like I could see somebody saying, I'm going to sneak a piece of bread back into this apartment so that they don't think that we took the bread back.
Yeah.
I could see that happening. I could not see anything Kramer does happening. Like, he goes to the Cuban embassy to try and get cigars, which are illegal in this country. And like, it's funny because they're like, yeah, sure, here's some cigars if you give us the jacket, but it doesn't feel real like a lot of the show does.
Yeah, and I guess like when I was talking earlier about like the light surrealism, I feel like that kind of plays a part into maybe why I enjoy some of that. But I feel like you were saying with the karate stuff, like it crosses a line of believability where it's like that's not just a weird detail that's like it's kind of strange and then you stop. It's like it keeps going on, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like okay, if you're actually like Kramer being in a karate class with children, that's the joke. You
Yeah.
leave it there and then you're done. But then it's like now we're gonna have this extended montage of him like fighting children, and then he's gonna be like doing moves that are not even karate moves on them, and it's like okay, now this is too far. Like what should happen is like at the very end of the episode, they're like, oh, let's go talk to Kramer, and then they open up the door, and then it's like a bunch of children, and he's like, you know, in the middle, like, oh, hey guys, and then like, and then everyone laughs. It's like, oh, he was in a karate class with the children, ha 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 ha. That's the joke. Get out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess I can appreciate it in terms of like the very next episode we watched is, you know, he's getting involved with elderly people, so it's almost like a complete 180 from the last episode we watched. So
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
if you want to
Um,
get into the episode The Wizard, take it
sure.
away, Comics Kid.
Okay, so Jerry buys a personal digital assistant, which for anyone born in the last 20 years, this is kind of like a cell phone, except it doesn't make calls. I feel like I remember these things. I remember when I was in like middle school, there would be like this one kid who would have one. And it's like, come on, man, you're in middle school. What do you have to remember? Like, what do you have? But like these things, like if you were saying like, how are people moving forward going to remember TV from the 20th century? And I'm thinking like, how are people moving forward going to remember, like, what is this thing? They're going to think like, is this a science fiction show? Like, is this a Star Trek phaser? Like, you know, but yeah, Jerry buys one for his dad, and apparently his dad doesn't really care about the gift, but he cares about like the deal, like, you know, the good deal that Jerry got. And so Jerry buys one. It's too expensive, but he tells his dad it was only like $50. And then Kramer, what was it? Did he win the lottery or something? Or yes, okay. He sold a book deal that's going to be made into a movie, and that doesn't really go anywhere. They don't. I was expecting at the end of the episode, like his friend would call him and say, "Sorry, Kramer, but they already made a movie of that. You stole that idea from some other, you know, or whatever." But so Kramer moves down to wherever Jerry's parents live, and he is like Jerry's dad for some reason is not able to run for being in charge of the retirement community, but then he wants to run Kramer so that he can control things from behind the scenes. So that's the Kramer subplot. What was going on with Elaine in this one?
Hold on. let's try to remember this. What's happening with George? Oh yeah. So he is like he lies to Warren Foster and Grace Zabriskie that he actually has a house in the Hamptons, and that's why he can't make an appointment for the foundation. And Elaine, I guess, has to get Jerry's mail.
Yes, but I forgot. She is dating a guy, and Jerry says, "Oh, so you're dating a black guy?" And she says, and the whole thing is she's trying to figure out, is he biracial? Is he black? He doesn't look black. But anyway, the end of the episode, the joke is, and there's different moments where she thinks she's got a way to figure it out. Like he has African art on the wall, and then he says, "Yeah, I'm from Africa," and she says, "Oh, okay." And he says, "Well, actually, South Africa." And then we had to get out, and so then she's like, "You know, come on, I was so close." And then she tries to set him up with, was it a magazine subscription or something, where they're like, they want your information, and she says like, "We'll skip all this. What about race?" And he says Asian, just to mess with them because it's none of their business. And so I thought all that was pretty funny. But the punchline is, because at one point they're in a restaurant and somebody says something and he's like, "Oh, these people, they have a problem with mixed race couples." And then she thinks she's figured it out, but then it turns out that he thinks that Elaine is Hispanic. And then, you know, we probably never see that guy again. And then George, like you said, so then Elaine tells Susan's parents George does not have a house in the Hamptons, but then later they say, "Oh yeah, your house in the Hamptons, George." And when George figures out that Elaine has blown things, he is going to take this as far, like he wants to see if they will crack on this lie. And then Jerry is it in Florida, or is he in just some other part of New York State? Okay, yeah. What did you think of this episode?
I think I like it more than the last one, but
Mhm.
I feel like this is like season 9 now. This is the final season, and I do think like there's like an element of tiredness that's kind of setting in. Like there's a scene where they comes on over. Elaine is getting the mail, and then George is insecure that Jerry didn't ask him to get the mail, but then Jerry has to like console him by saying, "I need you to come over and flush my toilet." And it's
Mhm.
like there's like yelling, and then like everyone has to pretend like this is actually really serious. I'm like, okay, like this feels like it's just kind of Seinfeld by rote at this point.
Mhm.
And then but that being said, there's still really I think the Elaine subplot is very funny. I think the payoff is like the very last joke is actually hilarious. Where they're like, oh, so we're both white. Yeah.
Mm.
You want to go to the Gap?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Mhm.
I do like this might be my favorite Warren Frost Grace Zabriskie subplot because I do like well maybe aside from the Rye, but like I like them just kind of showing up and you know going along with George as he's like trying to you know be lie the entire way and the
Mhm.
whole like if you know someone's lying you call them out and you lie otherwise you're a liar too. I
Yeah.
like that. I just don't like anything with Jerry and Kramer in Florida.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because I find like this type of old person like badgering and not understanding what you're saying. I just find it all very, very annoying. And I yeah, that's and it's very much that kind of a thing. So I
Yeah.
find
It's annoying and also unfortunately all too real. Like I
yep,
a couple of
yep.
days ago, I a couple days ago at work, I won't say exactly. I've hinted at what I do as a living, but like I had so many people who needed help with their technology, and that is not strictly speaking what I do. And so, but I was still like trying my best to help them, and I'm just like, I don't know anything about your cell phone. Like I have this brick that makes phone calls, and I can text, and that's about it. But like, someone needs like help restarting their phone, and I'm just like, I don't know. Leave me alone. And so like Jerry trying to like say, look, it does more things than just calculates the tip. It's you're right, like it's annoying, but also I feel like it was kind of cathartic, like seeing this blow up in everybody's face, like, and I'm like, yeah, like I don't know, like you're right, like it wasn't my favorite part of any of these episodes, but I kind of it felt more real to me than some of the other stuff in these episodes.
Yeah, I guess I had the thing, like when we talk about like a movie that's like heavy, and you'll come to that thing where you're like, I want to watch a movie to get away from like the woes of real life.
Yeah.
That's me with this episode.
Okay. Yeah.
I
I,
want to. I work with so many older people, and I I don't like
mhm.
like oh my god. Yeah, this was very much all too real, and it wasn't even just like I don't know, like the catharsis wasn't as uh delicious to me as it was to you. It was like
I I feel that. Yeah.
yeah.
Um. So, did you have anything else to say about the wizard?
Um Not really. Yeah. But I don't know. Like, did you have what I had where it did feel a little Seinfeld by rote, or
Uh, maybe I guess because um it's hard for me to say because like I don't know what the where the peak Seinfeld is. You know how you were saying that like because we're both Red Letter Media fans and like Mike and Rich they talked about Star Trek: The Next Generation and they said that like season 2 is better than season 1, but they said season 3 is where it just is like peak excellence. And then they said like by the time you get because that show lasted like 7 years I think, and so they said season 7, season 6 not as good as like season 3 through 5. So I don't know where Seinfeld peaked and where it started to like okay it's getting a little tiresome. So for me like because I feel like each of these episodes, I think the Rye might have been my well, the Rye is one of my favorites, and then like I think with the Foundation, like especially after you were kind of talking about your problems with the Foundation, I realized I kind of agreed with what you were saying. I think each episode kind of had some issues, and so like I'm not sure. I feel like they're all kind of like I'm not sure where peak is yet, or if they're still like trying to get there.
Mhm.
Um, and I thought it was weird that in the Foundation, Susan's parents seemed to like George, and then in this episode they're like, oh, we don't like him because we blame him for our daughter's death. Which is it's funny because earlier in the episode George says, I think they blame me for Susan's death. And Jerry is like, oh, because you bought the poison envelopes. And then at the end, that turns out to be exactly what it is. That was funny. But I was like, in my brain, I'm thinking this should be lining up with their previous appearance. And if I had been, because, this episode was in 98, so it had been 2 years since, or a year and a half since the Foundation. And so maybe they just think, people aren't really, this isn't, DVDs aren't even a thing yet at this point. Like, people don't, in 98, people do not collect TV shows to rewatch. You know what I'm saying? Like, they may watch reruns, but they're not necessarily going to, the people making the show don't expect the audience to remember the Foundation. They're like, okay, just forget that. That was 2 years ago. Just watch this episode. And we live in a very different era where now, just about anyone who's watching Seinfeld is going to be barreling through it a lot faster than, 10 years or however, 9 years or however long it took them to go through the series originally. But that was just a minor niggle on my part.
Okay. Well, you ready to talk about the finale?
Yes. Do you want to talk about the plot of this one? I feel like I accidentally kind of took over on that.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. So George and Jerry's pilot gets picked up by the new president of NBC, and because of this, they have access to a private jet. So they get on the private jet to go to Paris. Something goes wrong, and then they wind up in a trial. A bunch of supporting characters from previous episodes, gag characters, show up at the trial, and then they go to jail. The end of the show. Comic Skid, what do you think of the finale?
Might be my favorite one of this batch.
Interesting.
Okay. I can't remember who said it. I think it was Josh from Red Letter Media who said one time that Seinfeld just kind of stopped, like they didn't have a good ending. And I've heard other people who complain about the ending of Seinfeld, and boy, do I disagree. I think this is one of my favorite finales to a show. And bear in mind, I have never regularly watched Seinfeld, but keeping in mind that I said I was disappointed that these characters refused to change and grow and become better people, I was just chef's kiss, just that these guys get punished for being horrible in the final episode. I feel like that is a perfect statement on who they were for the previous 8 or 9 years, and now it comes back to bite them. I think that is amazing. And I was noticing the previous episode before this one was called The Clip Show, and I hate clip show episodes. I hate them. Like Scrubs and Friends both did clip show episodes. It just feels so lazy. Like we've to do 20 episodes in this season, and we've written 19 scripts. Let's just not write a 20th script. Let's just take a bunch of clips from earlier episodes and just throw it together in a really sloppy way. And I'm just like, do something better. Like, hire new writers.
We've been talking about today's kids, and today's kids will never understand the frustration of a clip show episode.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Because nowadays, 8 episodes for Stranger Things or whatever, or 13 episodes. There are still the shows, the CW superhero shows are still doing the 20 episode commitment or whatever. But I can't remember the last time a series that I was watching did a clip show. But this one, it kind of dabbles in that because it's got some clips, but it's framed by people at this trial who are testifying against one of the main characters. And so it makes sense to have a few clips, and it's not predominantly clips. But so I feel like them going to jail is perfect. And I don't understand why anyone was complaining about this finale.
Yeah, so you said this was your favorite of the bunch. The reason I said interesting is because I was not sure if you were aware of this show's or this finale's reputation. I just know that generally speaking, I don't know if people hate this episode. I do know a lot of people find this episode disappointing. And I'm a little confused as to why they find it disappointing, because just by the nature of what the show Seinfeld is, coming up with an ending is going to be disappointing, because it's either just going to be another episode and then it's over, or it would have to betray what it is, and all of a sudden everything's going to get dramatic, and they have to fake some kind of symmetry, it's lost or something, that would just sound like a complete betrayal of what the show you've been watching even is. And honestly, as a finale goes, I didn't think it was that bad. Like this is about as good of a finale to Seinfeld as I could have hoped or as I could have imagined, because this isn't like the kind of show where you think about the ending, right? It's about just watching an episode and enjoying yourself for a half hour, right?
Hmm.
This isn't Breaking Bad, right? Like the ending of Breaking Bad is like, okay, this is a story that's spread out over several episodes, and then the ending kind of matters. The ending to Seinfeld actually doesn't matter. Um, the reputation of this finale that I'd always heard was, oh, it's just a bunch of like gag characters from like previous episodes just show up and it's a parade of that. That's really not until like the last 20 minutes.
Hmm.
And I was honestly surprised how much plot there was before that. I guess in terms of like just complaints I would have for it, they didn't have material for an hour of television. So it does feel a little dragged out, particularly in the beginning.
Hmm.
But I don't know, like, and I do think like the contrivance of Kramer, like, oh my god, I just have something in my ear, like that's like the one thing where I'm feeling your like maybe not frustration, but maybe confusion with Kramer, where you're like, this doesn't really feel real at all. That's the one where it felt like, I don't know, we need something weird to happen. Michael Richardson, just or Richards or whatever his name is, do something. And he's like, I have swimmer's ear. And then like that almost felt like it could have been improvised. It's so like almost interchangeable or whatever. But outside of that, I don't know. Like I thought it was fine.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I would really like to go back in time, and anytime someone complains about the Seinfeld finale, I would just want to say why, because and maybe everyone else has less of a problem with the what I have an issue with of like bad people continuing to be bad people, but I yes, the swimmer's ear thing was it's just a contrivance. We just have to get the plane to nearly crash. And I despite my like I did kind of like that Elaine almost confesses to she says I've always loved you, Jerry, or she's about to say I've always loved you, Jerry, and then later he at the trial he says, by the way, what was it you were going to say? And she says, I've always loved United Airlines. I thought that was funny. I don't know why. But yeah, so in this one, like they like you said, the finally NBC wants to pick up the pilot. I thought that was a nice cap off because the first episode we watched, they're trying to write the pilot, and I wasn't sure how big of a part that played in the entire series. But I thought that was a nice little comeback.
I agree.
And so they go, they're gonna get it, and then it's like, oh, here's a private plane, and then Kramer nearly crashes the plane, so then they land in, is it Maine or Massachusetts? Okay, and then a guy gets carjacked by someone who I was ready to swear up and down was Aaron Paul. I looked him up, and Aaron Paul was 18 at the time of filming this episode, but it turns out it was not Aaron Paul. But if you look up on Google, was Aaron Paul in the Seinfeld finale? There are other people asking that question because I found on Reddit someone said, "Was that Aaron Paul?" And I was like, "Thank you." Even though it wasn't him, I'm at least glad that other people were confused. But I mean, this guy looks like what's his name? Jesse from Breaking Bad. Like I like dressed just like Jesse, but so and then the cop like and this is I've never seen every episode, but this may be the worst that all of them are. Where like not
Yeah.
only do they not help, but they're making fun of the guy who's getting carjacked. And they're like, he's a fatty, fatty. He's not going to buy food. He can't buy food because he doesn't have money. He's a fatty. And
Yeah.
I was thinking like, ooh, I can't wait. Like I knew that they were going to go to jail, and I was thinking, yes, like justice. But they get arrested for breaking the Good Samaritan law. And apparently it's a national law that nobody has heard of except for the people in Massachusetts. And he says, yeah, we put it in right after Princess Diana, where all those photographers, and they're all just like, oh yeah. I thought that was funny too, that they're sympathetic about Princess Di, but they're not sympathetic about the guy who just like who they were watching from like 5 feet away. And then I think that Phil Morris is hilarious as the lawyer, and he was probably in an earlier episode. The way they introduce him here, there, I think he's really funny. He's not over the line with his humor, but he's just wacky enough that I get a big kick out of him.
Yeah, I imagine someone like a character like that hits different after the OJ trial. You know what I mean? Where it's like big lawyer, and making, doing like the big superstar lawyer thing. I thought I thought it was very funny too. Like his whole opening statement to the jury about like an innocent bystander. Innocence is the nature of being a bystander. Like,
yeah,
that was all really funny.
I also like because Terry Hatcher, her thing in whatever episode she was in was that Jerry wasn't sure if her breasts were real or if there was some implants done. And I don't, because watching the clip from that episode, so Terry Hatcher was saying that Elaine pretended to trip so that she could feel Terry Hatcher's breasts. But watching the clip, it didn't look like it was an accident, or it didn't look like she was pretending. It looked to me like she accidentally tripped. And maybe you had a different read on that. But then later, because Phil Morris is like, oh, wow, yeah, who's that? And then later he's sleeping with her, and he's like, they may be deliberating for months. And then he gets a call that they've got a verdict, and he just kind of like it makes like a silent crying face. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. I love it because he's sleeping with her. I thought he was funny. I liked it also when he was like yelling at George for not wearing the outfit he gave him, and he says like, Jerry, you need to wear a different tie. And then like Elaine is like, what about me? And he's like, you're perfect. And I don't know, I thought that was funny. Did you have a favorite? Because obviously, if you have seen every episode of the series, this would probably be like getting to see some of these characters that you hadn't seen for a while would probably be more rewarding, or maybe not. Maybe if everyone hates this episode as much as it seems, then maybe people didn't like seeing all these characters come back. But did you have a character here where you were happy to see them return, being not like super into Seinfeld?
I mean, I just like Patrick Warburton. So
yeah.
I'm not familiar with Putty. I don't know his thing. I know that he is a character in the show because my parents watched this show. So like, I know there is a character named Putty. He is played by Patrick Warburton. But it was kind of nice to actually see him.
Yeah. I do like him in just about anything I have seen that he's in. He's another one. Apparently, he early in his career, he was in some movie where his character is flogged, and it lasts like 3 minutes of screen time. And that's another one where I was like, really? Like, I always thought he was like the funny guy. Like, I've never seen him in a serious role. That was nice seeing him. I was howling with laughter because when they're getting ready for the delivery of the verdict, Warren Frost goes and buys a gun. I was like, oh wow, this got really dark, because I'm assuming if George wasn't going to be going to jail, that he was going to try and kill George. And I thought that was really funny.
Good.
I loved George's mom trying to trade in a sexual favor with the judge if he would give a lighter sentence to George. I thought that was hilarious. Also, George's dad. So one of George's bosses thought George was a communist, and then George's dad starts screaming at that guy. I thought that was great. I'm trying to think of like the guy in the bubble suit. I had never seen that clip or that episode where the who invaded Spain in the 8th century. But if you go to Google and you ask that, it will give a whole lot of like the Moors, and then you'll eventually get to the Seinfeld edit or wiki where it says the Moops, and I'm like, aha, that's what I was looking for. But yeah, some of these I was surprised because some of it, like Elaine deliberately putting the suit Nazi out of business, that's like an intentional horrible thing. But some of them, like Daphne from Frasier, she shows up, or it's not the character, but it's the actress, and she was in the episode with the contest, and that's another one that I was aware of. I had seen some clips from the episode, but I have not seen the whole episode. Have you seen the contest or know what I'm talking about?
Nope.
Okay, so the whole thing was there was a really attractive woman across the street.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. No, I saw that episode with my brother.
Okay, was she the woman across the street, or was she a different woman?
Oh, see, I can't remember, because, like, you never actually see the woman across the street.
Okay, because
it's always like the fourth wall. They're all just kind of looking past it, and it's like,
right.
there's an attractive woman over there.
Yeah.
Oh, look, Kramer showed up. Whoa.
So I was wondering if, because she somehow found out about the contest, and I was wondering, oh, was she the one that they were all ogling? But like just coming and saying like, yeah, they had a contest, like, and everyone in the courtroom acts so disgusted, and I'm thinking that's probably the least awful thing that is brought up in this episode. But some of it is like the bubble boy like attacked George, and then Susan was the one who, I think it was Susan who popped the bubble accidentally, trying to get him to stop strangling George. And then that's brought up as like isn't George awful? I'm thinking, no, you attacked him. Like, that's self-defense. Like, so some of it, it's like, maybe it's fun for fans of the show to see some of these callbacks, but some of it, I don't know if it necessarily works in the context of we need people to be character witnesses to say how awful they are. Because some of it, like, was it Jerry's fault that one guy got deported? Like, because there was a mail mix-up. Was that Jerry's fault, or was that just a happenstance and Jerry really had no control over the mail? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed seeing, like, even not watching the show, I was aware of some of these characters, and so I was like, okay, this is great. Like, getting to see some of these characters come back, I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah, and I was aware of like some of these, like, colloquially, like, who hasn't heard of the soup Nazi, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, no, it was kind of nice, at least for me, like, to kind of like, oh yeah, like my brother has told me about the Terry Hatcher episode, and like, I don't know, like it was kind of nice to at least have like a little sample set of all the kind of wacky, goofy characters that I've heard referenced for most of my life now.
Yeah. So what would you say your favorite episode of these was that you watched?
The Rye.
Okay, yeah. I really enjoyed that one. That was probably my second favorite. I just liked the whole concept of trying to sneak the bread back in their place, and just everything about that one pretty much coming together at the end. I thought that was great. And then this one, I just really enjoyed seeing these guys finally get their comeuppance. And there is, I don't know if you've seen it, but there was an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. It might have actually been a like 2 or 3 episodes together, where within the universe of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David was doing a revival of Seinfeld. And so you get to see like maybe 4 minutes of like an extra episode of Seinfeld after they're released from jail. And that was kind of interesting, I thought, like, not being a fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm and only being like a casually aware person of Seinfeld. I thought that was kind of interesting as a way to kind of do a reunion for Seinfeld.
Yeah, apparently that's like a whole season long thing.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure about that. And did I already ask you, do you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm?
No, you hadn't asked that. I actually have not seen it yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure, because that's one of those things, like you said, Larry David is kind of the George Costanza is a version of Larry David, but also I feel like Larry David has put a lot of himself into the character of Jerry Seinfeld in this show, because when I see clips of Larry David, I'm like, he's kind of doing like the high-pitched whiny thing that Jerry is known for in this show. And so I wonder if that's something that Larry David put in, or if that's something that Jerry put in and it kind of rubbed off on Larry David.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Did you have any final thoughts on what we watched?
No, I think we did a pretty extensive coverage on a lot of things. We talked about Seinfeld. We talked about streaming. We talked about the differences of watching television now versus when our parents watched TV. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know.
Talked about old people and technology.
Yeah. Speaking, what did you have anything you wanted to talk about in the next episode?
I don't. Oh, yes. Sorry. I was about to say, I don't think so. No. Okay. I have been struggling with this. Okay. So in the past, I have chosen some things that I did not intentionally mean for us to watch bad things, but we ended up watching bad things. Like that Scorpion King movie was awful. But I'm a big fan of Sword and Sorcery, so I thought, well, the first Scorpion King was pretty good, so we'll see. And then it was just atrocious. And incidentally, I have watched the next Scorpion King movie, and it has got what's his name? The guy from Spin City, who I don't remember his name, but he plays like a wacky scientist in it, and it's just as bad as the one we watched, Connor, like that movie. But I chose the animated Oz movie. Like, these are all like things that I chose. Capone, like, with all of these, I chose them going in blind. So I feel like you may not believe me, but I feel like I should not be held culpable for the torture that we went through, since I didn't know what we were getting into. But we are about. Okay, so I am going to choose something that I have seen before. It's awful, but I highly enjoyed this thing. Now I am choosing a movie called Dragon Wars: D War. This movie, I watched it less than a month ago, and I was Rich Evans cackling during this movie. So I hope that you have a similar experience. It has 2 Twin Peaks connections in it. Chris Mulkey and Robert Forster are both in it, and they have a pretty substantial amount of screen time. It's not like Django Unchained, where Dr. Jacoby like had like a line of dialogue. Like, it was these guys are in the movie, and so this one was on my brain because I just recently watched it. I will 100% be watching it again when we are ready to record, because I want to take notes and be prepared. I feel bad because this is the first time where I am willingly going into something that I know is trash, but it's entertaining trash, and I hope, knock on wood, that you also find it to be entertaining trash. And I hope that you don't. I hope the first words when we next record are not "Comics Kid, I hate you." But we'll see. It's called Dragon Wars: D War is the name of the movie.
So I have seen this movie before.
Oh, okay.
It has been so long. Like, I was a middle schooler, and it was like just like on TV when I was leaving like a spring break like place. I'm trying to remember where I was in like a vacation house that like my dad's boss had, that he let my dad use, and we were there too. I do not remember this movie. I do remember seeing TV spots for this. This played in theaters. So
yes. I'm sorry. I'm like making a malicious laugh. I'm not trying to be evil. I cannot wait. Oh boy. That's what we're going to talk about next time. And this is a landmark episode because, like I say, every other time that I've chosen something horrible, it was accidental, or I just didn't know the extent of what I was getting into. This time, I am willingly choosing something bad. So we'll be doing that sometime. Who knows when? In the meantime, I don't have anything else. Connor, do you have any final thoughts?
Oh yeah, where would I watch Dragon War: D War?
That's a good question, because oh no. Well, Google says it's on Amazon Prime with a subscription, and I don't know if you have that, but that I wasn't thinking about that. So yeah, good. I'm glad you have that. Because I have a DVD version that I bought for $1. And to quote, was it RoboCop or yeah. Yeah, so probably the best $1 I've ever spent in my life. But that is what we'll be talking about next time. And like I say, I don't know if I've ever looked forward to one of our podcasts more than this one. So that's it. In the meantime, am the Comics Kid 2099.
I'm Connor Nielsen.
And we'll see you whenever we do this one. Have a good one.